All right, well, welcome everybody. We're a quick midweek edition of Off the Cuff here because the world is too crazy and we had to sort of weigh in on this Whoopi Goldberg, the Holocaust was not about race issue that most of you probably have heard about right now. You know, Whoopi Goldberg hosts The View. We'll share a little clip of that later, but yeah, lots of drama unfolding in that world, in the world based on her comments. So we're going to kind of look at that today and kind of answer the question: is Whoopi Goldberg racist? And we'll kind of see where we land on that. I have some ideas already where I think I'm going to go with this. We'll see how well those work. So Leroy, how are you doing, my friend?
I'm good. I am. Yeah, I am very good. As I'll just leave it at that. I am, trying to get some stuff done, today, and it's just a really funny day, really interesting day.
I know you're well, this is yeah, well, it's tough to always get things done whenever you've got work and life and so many things going on. That's for sure. And believe it or not, folks, we have other things other than Whoopi Goldberg in life that are far more important. But this actually is kind of one of those important issues. Actually, it's sort of timely that we are talking about this issue with Whoopi Goldberg that came along. I think it's interesting because we just had our conversation last week
Mhm.
with Richard Weikart
Yeah.
talking about Darwinian racism and the issues that come up with that. And so that's something that dovetails with this. And there's a link in the YouTube comments section where this was posted, where folks are, if you're watching live here, it's in there, a link to that interview as well. It kind of gives some history on how to answer that question what Goldberg is really confused about. So
Mhm.
before we dive into actually unpacking her comments, I'm sure many people maybe even haven't even seen her comments or heard her comments. So let's real quick. Here's a clip from The View and what she said regarding race and the Holocaust.
Well, also, if you're
Yeah.
going to do this, then let's be truthful about it because the Holocaust isn't about race.
No.
No, it's
Well,
not about
maybe
race.
ethnicity. Well, they
No,
consider
it's
Jews
about
a different race.
But it's not about race. It's not about
Well,
race.
what is it about?
Because it's about man's inhumanity to man. That's what it's about.
But it's about white supremacy. It's
Well,
about
but
going
it's not-
after
it's
Jews
not about
and
race.
gypsies
It's,
and
but these are two
Romans.
white groups of people.
Well, they
How
were
do we
after black
They
people
didn't see
too.
them as white,
And they were
But
after
you're missing the
homosexuals.
point. You're
Yeah.
missing the point.
Yeah.
The minute you turn it into race, it goes down this alley. Let's talk about it for what it is. It's how people treat each other. It's a problem. It doesn't matter if you're black or white, because black, white, Jews, everybody eats each other.
Okay, first thoughts, Leroy. What do you think? What was your first thoughts when you heard that discussion that she had?
It is. Well, so I think that we have to all take a step back. Okay, there is a particular context that they're having that they're having this conversation in, and that context is obviously about race. So we can't disabuse her statements from that context. But when we think about what she literally said, this is, just listening to her, is that, and here's how I saw it, that if the Jews are either above all people, below all people, or equal to all people, right? To say that the Jews are above all people is racist, and to say that they're below all people is racist. But if they're equal to all people, then her statement is true that this is inhumane. What happened to them was an absolute tragedy, and it's a human tragedy. It is not limited to a particular ethnicity. It is a human tragedy. It is a blight on the world and all humanity. And I think if you see her statements in that context, they make a lot of sense.
Yeah, I jumped onto that part when I first listened to her too, and I thought, okay, I think she's making a point here about we have this common humanity, and that's it's not. But the problem is, I don't think that's the way she meant it. Now, if that
No,
was her point, that hey, before we start putting race in there, we have to realize this is about our common humanity, and people being inhumane to other human beings. We're all humans. We all have this equal standing, and so we need to disabuse ourselves of making race the center of everything. I still think her first half of her comments are wrong historically, but at least I could resonate with where she's going. But the problem is, I don't think. I was wondering if you'd go that direction with this, and I don't think that is. So I don't know. Did you see her interview on
I did.
Colbert?
I did.
Okay,
And-
I have a clip of that. Let me play that too. And this is where I sort of went from saying, okay, I see what she's trying to drive at. I think she did it poorly, to saying, okay, she's just um, historically ignorant in this case. She doesn't have the background to make intelligent comments about this issue. Sort of where I went back to after hearing this. So let me jump in with here's the clip from now. It's just, this is no video on this. I think there's copyright issues with CBS or whoever has this, couldn't get the video portion of this. So this is just the audio, but you can see Leroy and I at the bottom in our lovely faces as we respond to this.
Because I feel, being black, when we talk about race, it's a very different thing to me. So I said that I felt that the Holocaust wasn't about race. And people got very, very, very angry, and still are angry. I mean, I'm getting, all of the mail from folks, and the very real anger, because people feel very differently. But I thought it was a salient discussion, because as a black person, I think of race as being something that I can see. So I see you, and I know what race you are.
See, does that shed some different light on what she meant by that?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I mean, I think that we all need to come to grips with the fact that Whoopi Goldberg has been a participant in the oppressed Olympics, right? She's been a participant in the discussion for the oppressed Olympics, where the various, ethnic groups are competing for most oppressed, victim status. That is totally where Whoopi is coming from. But her statement, in and of itself, sans the context, is I think that is an accurate statement. Now, obviously, once you add that the fact that she's, a competitor in the oppressed Olympics, yeah, that statement is going to take on a totally different context. But I think as Christians, right, as Bible believers, as people who believe that the Word of God is our authority, when someone says something that is true, yeah, we need to agree with that. Does that mean that we embrace every aspect of what they said ever, or even in the moment? No, right? We don't. But we need to be able to say, okay, in this sense, this is true. However, yeah, does Whoopi mean that, that there is that she's trying to go for the gold in the oppressed Olympics? Then, yeah, I would say certainly that's her shtick for a million years. It has been.
Yeah, and I think the answer, the way I reconcile what she's doing here is this. I don't think the answer to the question, I don't think that she's racist in the way that is being implied, that she's anti-Semitic.
Right.
But she is, if I can borrow the terms from critical race theory folks that we've discussed at length, she is centering blackness. She is saying, in other words, notice what she says in that. She said, I feel that my blackness is different than their Jewishness.
Right.
Other people feel differently about it. Therefore, I don't see the Jews as a race. They're white. She doesn't see them as their own racial category. They're a white race. So therefore, the Holocaust couldn't be about race, because it's not about black. It's not about white. It's only about white on white. So this is what I see in her is not that she is, again, I don't think she's anti-Semitic in that traditional sense of how we think of that word. But I do think she's blinded by the truth and the facts of history based on her feelings to center her experience, and her experience then must be the determining factor for other people's experiences. So, because she wouldn't define it as race, therefore there's no, you have to understand. She's saying, you're missing the point. What the point is that she gets to define what it is.
What's very
I think that's what she's really saying.
No, I agree with you. I think what's very interesting to me is that when you really look at her statement, she has the whole Nazi. I'm not saying that she's a Nazi, I'm not even saying that she's actually forwarding Nazi views, but what I am saying is that the concept of race that she is using, the way race is being used in that sentence, conflates ethnicity and race,
Yes.
right? So, and when you look at it in that sense, now when you start to talk like a normal person, all these distortions and this distorted view comes to the forefront. So, skin color is not a primary attribute of humans; it's a secondary
Yeah. But see, you're
attribute.
making that a broader argument. That's not what her point was. She still wants to
It
make
is.
skin color a primary attribute, but that's why she says, Holocaust against the Jews wasn't about race
Was
because
white
they don't
on white, right?
they're white on white,
Yeah,
even though they're Middle Eastern, even though
exactly.
it
But this
doesn't
is what I'm
matter.
getting at.
They're white passing for her, so therefore they don't
They're
count.
white. Yeah, so this is where we really get to see where her distorted views come from. Because now, if racism is reduced, if racism is really about skin color, right? White or black or brown or red or whatever. If race is really about that, then no, then her views take on this context that it isn't race because it's white on white. But from a biblical standpoint, the scriptures say that there's only one race, that all men came from one man and one woman, and that there's only one race, and that's the human race, right? So if we're using race from
Yeah.
a biblical standpoint, then we're going to necessarily
Yeah.
see things from a different perspective. But if we're
And
using,
that's the part at the end. I think if that was what she was trying to argue for,
she
that we're
isn't
all
trying to argue that.
humans, but that's not what she was trying to
She isn't
argue
trying to
for. And I
argue that.
think that's what confused some people about what she's saying. She's not arguing there's one race, there's the human race. It kind of sounds like she's saying that's a human problem. No, but what she
Sure.
means is that because it wasn't a black or white issue, because it was white on white in her view,
Mhm.
it doesn't count as a genuine race issue. And this is the
Right.
part where, the Hollywood people I get, they're famous, they've made some movies, they've made lots of money, but they don't they're poorly educated and they're poorly informed. I mean, when Joy Behar is the voice of reason on The View, you've got a problem. Um, you know, she's like, it's not. I think you're wrong there, Whoopi. But
But she's intoning that the common cultural view, what's
yeah,
copying our cultural milieu, and I just want to make this statement as for people of the book, so to speak, Christians, we have to not so easily allow ourselves to be dragged to the left or to the right on
yeah,
these issues. We have to consistently speak from a biblical position so that when people disagree with us, we get a chance to clarify, bring to the forefront biblical truth, and apply it in these situations. And I think that we're having a super difficult time talking about these issues
yeah,
and really even thinking through them because again the way Whoopi is using race, she's using race in the same way that the Nazis did, where race and ethnicity are conflated to mean the same thing. Obviously with the Nazis there was a national component. You had to be German born, right? There's a national component
yeah.
of,
Well,
of their,
and
their view of race. That's why it was blood and
yeah,
soil, right?
yeah. And
You
there's
had to
two
be.
things for there for sure. I want to unpack that. I want to unpack first what you're on right now. What was the Nazi view of race? What did they mean by that? Because she doesn't understand that.
She doesn't.
But then two, I want us to kind of close things off with how should we as Christians respond to those comments that she's made in the way that we think that people should respond to us when there's disagreements. And so we'll explore that for a couple minutes as well. But first on the Nazi thing and how they did that. So what Whoopi Goldberg doesn't understand, and this is again what we talked about with Richard Weikart a little bit in his latest book, Darwinian Racism, and we've talked about in other shows that we've done before. But what she doesn't understand is that for the Nazis, the goal, they saw the Nordic peoples. The words Nordic and Aryan were essentially used interchangeably. So, yes, there are other light skinned people in the world, but they used the Darwinian's hierarchy of racial origins. And they connected that not only with those phenotypical outward features like skin color, they did have a geographic connection to that, to something, what we would align with ethnicity. So it was a mix of all those things. But they did see the Jews as not from the North, because they were from the Middle East, they were not of the Nordic race. That was how they defined these racial distinctions.
Hmm.
So yes, if you look historically, the people, not just the Nazis, but a lot of folks who were look for sort of cleansing the population of the impure races, the lower races, all the Southern Europeans. So the people from Spain, the lower parts of Europe were all considered racially inferior.
Hmm.
It was those Nordic region, the northern, because and the argument was because they had to live through such cold, the cold periods of history, they had to struggle to survive, and so only the strongest and the best people could survive because
Struggle
it
for
was such
existence.
hard living conditions. The people, as you go farther south, had it better, had it easier. This is their argument. I'm not saying it's
Right.
valid, it's just their argument. And so you had people who had inferior genetics, inferior capacities to survive, the harshness of the world. So they didn't by nature get culled from the human populations. And so it was the German responsibility to kind of cleanse the world of those inferior races so that only the best genetically could survive. And those were the Nordic Aryan peoples. So the Jews were a distinct race. They were considered that. And they were considered, in that Darwinian worldview, genetically, or biologically inferior, has not evolved to a higher state. That's their view. Now she might disagree with that because it doesn't center blackness the way she wants to center it. But you can't change history just because you have, again, that's fine with critical race theory, where standpoint, from your perspective becomes truth just because
Mhm.
you believe it, and that's what she wants. Because she believes it, therefore it must be true. That's, I don't know. What do you think of that?
No, I think that's accurate. The whole thing is a question comes up: what is race and what is ethnicity?
Yeah. Okay. Good. You saw that. So yeah. So Sub-Sahara asked that question. I have it popped up there. So maybe unpack that in your understanding of it.
So
Good
think
question.
of something. It's a very philosophical argument. The universals and the particulars, right? The universals are those things that are everywhere, and the particular are aspects of those universals. So we don't. So race would be what humans are. A species, if you will, what humans are, right? And an ethnicity would be an aspect of that species, but it's still the same, right? That's how I would say it
Yeah.
from that perspective.
Yeah.
But
Let me
from
jump in with my thoughts, and then I want you to come back on that. So the way
yeah,
I've kind of outlined it, and this is in my recent studies. So uh, ethnicity has been a distinction that has existed since the dawn of ages.
hmm
Since the dawn of man. We read about it in the Old Testament time, the ancient Near East. People were from, generally is a regional or cultural distinctions determined ethnicity. So the way people dressed, it could be language based. A lot of it was geographically based, culture based. So religious practices, those sorts of things. All those things factored into types of food they ate. All of those are ethnic identities and ethnic things. Race is a very recent construct, and it is a social construct invented by the culture, and specifically Western Enlightenment kind of did that. In the late 1800s, early 1900s, it kind of crystallized, and that was based on external characteristics, so features. So skin color is one of those, but this
hmm
is where Whoopi Goldberg doesn't understand, again, the history of race. But it was also other external features. So it could be shape of the skull, hair, like, so you have curly hair, others, like I have no hair, but straight hair versus curly hair, or the woolly hair that would be the Africanized features that you have, like say the broader nose, those sort of features. But the Jews, that's why you see the depictions of the Jews in the Nazi literature with these exaggerated features, the big hooked noses. um, so these phenotypic features are generally speaking, are what race is classified on. And now it
from a
can,
social construct, from
yeah,
social
from the
construct.
social construct, yeah. So it can cross over. There's bleed over in those things. But for example, I've said this before. Charlie Brown. Remember the old Charlie Brown where Lucy always called Charlie Brown? She said, "Charlie Brown, you blockhead." That was actually a racial slur, an ethnic slur, kind of big, but it looked at an external feature of square features. Those were features considered of so actually some sort of Nordic people who are still considered racially inferior by the Germans. And so they had these sort of squared features. So a
Mhm.
blockhead, when certain people from these regions immigrated to the United States, other white folks called them blockheads as a racial epithet that they were not didn't have the right features, so they were looked down upon. So that's what race does, though. It took those external features, and so that's the way I kind of distinguish between those two a little bit. That hopefully that
Yeah,
makes
and it is,
sense.
and it is but the way society has used race is to not refer to the general in the sense that we're all of the same race. We're a
Exactly.
taxonomic group, right?
Yeah.
What society has done is it has used race and it has conflated ethnicity with race, meaning that your features that fit you within a particular group is now your race
Yeah.
rather than what you are. Your immutable characteristics, not the
Yeah.
thing that all humans share in common, right? All humans share the same, features in common. There's this, we're men, we're mortal, we die,
Yeah.
we're or whatever. But what society has done is conflated these issues to make uh, to bring those how would we say those non-essential features
Yeah.
and made those essential features,
Yeah.
and that's
And that's
really
what and that's what Goldberg is trying to do here.
yeah.
That's what Whoopi Goldberg is trying to do. Is she's saying the essential feature is melanin,
Hmm.
count. The blackness or the whiteness of one's skin. So the amount of melanin or the lack of melanin determines what your central feature is. And so because Jews can pass as white because they have less melanin, therefore they don't count as a race in her view. So they
Right,
shouldn't count as a race. Now,
right,
again, partly there's agreement in the sense of I don't think the idea of racial distinctions is a valid distinction across the board. I think that again, we're one human species. I'm not even sure I would like the word race at all because I think it's just too confusing. I'd rather
too
eliminate
confusing,
it.
right?
It's used differently. Like Stalin used it to refer to humans as the human race.
Hmm.
So when he talked about sort of cleansing certain inferior humans from the human race, he didn't use it in that way, but yet he used it in a way that sort of still made distinctions between people. It's just there's a confused way that it's not always used by the same way by the same people, and even in the same time the same way. It's just a really a muddy word historically at times. So you have to look
Right.
really closely at the
So there,
context.
that would be what we call synchronic and diachronic. Diachronic is how a word changes over time, right? How
Yeah,
a word changes from its inception through time. And then there's synchronic, how you view a word within a specific time
yeah,
and a specific moment in time.
yeah,
And my phone ringing, I shall
yeah.
answer
That's all right. And
it.
and that's what Whoopi Goldberg's trying to do, right? She's taking she's taking the synchronic her current definition of how she sees it based on her feelings. I
Right.
feel this way. This is my lived experience. And now I need to read back into history my lived experience and say, well, that doesn't
Exactly.
count. That's really the mistake that she's made. And so it's based on two things. One, an ignorance of history and not understanding history and how that word is used differently because it is a social construct, and not respecting that difference and valuing that difference for how destructive those ideas are of racial discrimination.
And here's
And then
here's
that's well, just that's the first one. And the second one is then she's imposed it, like you've said. So she doesn't
exactly.
understand history, and then she's
And pose that
prioritized her lived experience. Yeah,
now, what's very interesting is, and here's where we Christians need to be very wise. Okay, when she's speaking to that group, they all share the same understanding of what race is. For them, race is culture, ethnicity and humanity, right? They conflated race and ethnicity together to mean to have a specific idea. And what she's doing is breaking from that construct. She may do it clumsily, She may do it ham-handedly, but she is breaking from that construct, and they are going to crucify her for attempting in any way to
Hmm.
reshape or change the definition or understanding of race from how they've preached it, from
Yeah.
their societal and
Yeah.
cultural construct.
I don't know. I mean, I think my take is I think that she just said the quiet part out loud that a lot of people do believe. Again, I think my sense is she's not a racist in the way we think of it. I don't think she
Right.
hates
I agree with that.
Jews. I don't think she's anti Semitic. I don't think she'd deny the Holocaust exists. She's just trying to prioritize her feeling of her what race is,
Hmm.
and say that that needs to determine. I need to reinterpret history through my lens of race, and that's the whole point of critical race theory: is the reinterpretation of history through the present lens of how we interpret it. So I
No, I
think
totally
that
agree.
I think she's in line with what the elitists, that people are being educated to believe. She's just not supposed to say it that way, and she's not supposed to say it out loud.
Yeah.
I
No,
think
I
that's
agree.
the real problem with it.
I think that's interesting, but they're not coming down on her because of that issue. They're coming down on her because she appears to be attacking the most favored status or the most oppressed status. That's what she appears to be attacking, and that's the whole point that the 1619 project. And I know we're probably stepping out of bounds here, on a wide path here. But that's the whole point of all the 1619 projects, trying to reimagine what slavery was and when it began and what it was all about,
Yeah.
and all those other projects. They're again attempting to win the most oppressed Olympics. I mean, if that's a way to put
Yeah.
this.
No, it's true.
And Whoopi,
And she runs
and Whoopi
afoul in
is,
that direction too.
yeah, and
Yeah.
she's being attacked. She's being attacked by another group because of that very assault, so to speak, on
Hmm.
their status. And I was going to say, as Christians, we need to take a step back and
Yeah.
ask, to what extent are we going to participate, if we're going to participate in this conversation, and how we're going to participate, and what's our voice in this conversation? Do we say what's true, even if that puts us at odds with people who disagree with our
Yeah.
particular view? And I think a lot of Christians are like, well, I mean, that's an in-house squabble. Well, it's technically not an in-house squabble, because if you actually listen to what she said, I think that she's saying that all people are the same, and what's happened with the Holocaust is inhumanity.
Yeah.
And if
I,
she's
I
making the case,
but
we
I think
should.
she'd only apply that to that circumstance because it's white
She
on
may.
white.
She
And
may.
that's where I think you're right though in this sense too, is what I would like to see. I mean, I'm fine. They suspended her for a couple weeks. I'm not a deplatforming kind of person. I think the idea of cancel culture is tragic for an open society, a free society, a free speech society. I'd rather see legitimate people come in and have a dialogue about, okay, Whoopi Goldberg, say whatever you're going to say, even if it's ignorant, even if it's foolish, whatever. Just say, let's say, okay, now let me come back and say, okay, Whoopi, but here, do you understand this? And hopefully there could be a dialogue where she
That's
say,
old
oh, I
America.
did not. Yeah, what's that?
That's old America. Old
Yeah,
America.
yeah, that's what I'd
Old
rather
America would have
see.
done exactly that.
Yeah,
But this
and
is
that's
new
what I would
America.
think would be healthy if we could step into that. I'm not. Whoopi Goldberg and I probably don't agree. If we picked 1,000 topics, we probably disagree about 1,020 of them. So I don't. I'm not aligning with her in almost anything that I've ever heard her say. Not that I've really followed the view or what she says too much, but I hear clips. But I think you're right in the sense that like I think we have to take a step back and say that there's a point of contact with what she said for the Christian worldview. That even if she's not, I think what she's saying is that this is a human issue, not a race issue. She means only because it's white on white,
Hmm.
and she wants to
No, I
reserve
agree.
the race issue for only white, black, white versus Asian. She wants the CRT, the critical race theory view of what race is only. And so
I
I
agree.
think, but where you're coming in, I think, if I'm reading you right, is that her idea that it's a human issue, not a race issue, is a point where we can say we agree with that. Ultimately, it is that. That's a supervening issue. Yes,
Exactly.
the Hitler for Hitler it was racism, but Hitler's views down here. Above that, we can acknowledge it's not just wrong because he had a defective view of race, because he was evil and wicked for what he did. It's also wrong for a bigger issue because even if they are the same race, whatever, however you want to classify it, it was still of one human dehumanizing another human being.
Exactly.
And that's her bigger issue. Now, if she could also bring her to the black white issue, and say, okay, there's a bigger issue than what CRT would acknowledge or her worldview would acknowledge, then I think that there'd be a potential
She
to
won't.
start.
She won't do that because she doesn't have the skill set to do that. It's not her worldview.
Yeah,
It's
no,
not
I
within
get
her
that.
worldview. It's not within her worldview to do that. And to be honest, my concern is not so much Whoopi Goldberg. I mean,
Yeah,
she's got to she's got to live with the consequences of what she says in a particular community to which she has said it. She's got to live with that.
yeah,
But as a person who is listening, who has a perspective, who I think have a biblical perspective, I want to agree where I can agree. And I told a friend of mine yesterday, I want to do that for two reasons. I want to do that because number one, I'm not a parrot for either the left or the right. I have a particular um, a view of the world to which I hold to. So I'm not a parrot for either the left or the right. Number one, and number two, I want to agree because where she says something that totally aligns with what the Bible teaches, I want to be able to say that, and I want an opportunity for people to disagree with me, to be able to say why I disagree with them, and to say why there's a biblical voice that needs to be heard here, rather than to just let these people have their own conversation. So I definitely want to step into that in an area where I can and differentiate that voice from their voice, differentiate that perspective
yeah.
from their perspectives, so that we may be sounding similar, but we're not saying the same thing. Similar and same are not the same, are not identical.
Yes. And I think that's the part that's confusing about like where people might want to glom onto what she says. Well, what she says makes sense. Like the second part of her view statement, like, okay, well, we're all human. I see. She's trying to get to a larger point. And I don't think that's, she's saying a similar thing, but like you said, but not the same thing.
Right.
But if people could, pull that little piece out and realize that, okay, yes, even her clarification on Colbert makes clear that that
She's not
she's
coming
really
from a biblical
she's
perspective.
not definitely not a biblical perspective of
Yeah.
that we're all human, created with some sort of sacred intrinsic value, and that's the thing that we all need to unify around. That she's just saying it doesn't count because the Nazis were white and the Jews were white, so they don't count for race.
And what's really
But
good about it, can I say this? What's really
yeah,
good about it is that foolishness now gives normal people an opportunity to talk about a difficult issue. I mean, imagine holding in your mind the concept that it doesn't count because it was white on white violence, right? And at the same time arguing that it's man's inhumanity to man. I mean, those are two, you know, ridiculously competing. Those are two
yeah,
crazy, competing ideas about the nature of man. That's reflective of that insanity, if you will, because those are two contrary points of view of what man is.
yeah,
In one sense, he's reduced to his immutable characteristics, his non-essential characteristics, I should say,
yeah.
his whiteness or his blackness or his redness or his yellowness or whatever. Versus, and then she's going to appeal to something more universal to say that we're all humans. I mean, that is just distorted thinking.
Yeah. And I think we'll have to probably leave with this, because we just wanted to do a quick little show just on this one little topic. But Leroy, you're bringing up such an important issue. We've discussed that idea of what does it mean to be human, the idea of human sacredness, and that why that as a starting point is really the answer to a lot of these uh, whether they're ethnic or racial, any of these sort of tribalistic divisions that come about. Whoopi Goldberg, she's leaned in the right direction a little bit in this comment with trying to eliminate the by decentering race from something, but unfortunately, her solution is to just make one other racial distinction at the center, as opposed to
Exactly.
eliminating the construct at all and saying, "Look, we're all human beings." Again, and even to say that we should never dismiss the fact that the Holocaust was largely about race.
Mhm.
wasn't the only
Yes.
factor, but it was largely about that. Nor should we forget, like I heard a Christian guy the other day say this, it really drives me insane. The Holocaust, killed 6 million Jews. It's like, no, it's wrong. The Holocaust, Hitler killed over 12 million people. 6
Mhm.
million were Jews, but 6 million others who were crippled, infirmed, for all the gypsies, all these other people he believed that were for some reason genetically, biologically, ethnically, racially impure for some reason. So it wasn't just, even then, it wasn't just about
Right.
anti-Semitism. It was a worldview about race that was wholly destructive, tied to the Darwinian science and the scientific consensus of the day. And so that's something that we've plumbed in other shows. People can check out at morethancake.org/off the cuff. You can see some other shows we've talked about this. If you want to hear more on something we haven't talked about, let us know. We'll try to dive into that, and we'll be going into that down the road. So, but I think folks shouldn't put aside that we can't unpack all that you're saying right now about that, but
Yeah.
but what Leroy is saying is really critical to answering this challenge
Yeah.
we
And
face
if I
today.
could just add one
Sure, yeah,
10-second point, what we are not saying is that historically that the Germans, the Nazis, didn't make this about race. They did,
yeah.
right?
Yes,
We are
exactly.
merely saying that theirs was a distorted view of race, and
Of
in it,
humanity, right?
of humanity, right? Theirs was a distorted. We're not trying to be ahistorical or rewrite history, right? We're simply trying to say that there is a view above all that we Christians need to appeal to for how we're going to understand this topic of race.
Yeah,
And that's how we ought to have that conversation. We're not saying and that the Germans were not about race. They
yeah,
absolutely were.
exactly. Yeah,
Right. They absolutely were.
yeah. They just had a different way of framing it that we do popularly today. Our
Exactly.
social construct of it is different than theirs, but that doesn't make it not about race. It just means
Right.
that we have to learn from history and see how the different ways people use that framing to dehumanize, to desacralize that which God has made sacred, which is all human life. So,
Yeah.
hey, one last thing before we sign off here. So, starting maybe this weekend, I don't know, we haven't figured out a date, maybe Friday or Saturday, we're going to start to do a little short series on apologetics, right? We're going to start that.
Yes.
Am I committing you to it right now? I'd like us to start doing a short series about what is the nature of that, how do we do it, how are we effective in sharing the good news of Jesus Christ with others through reason, through argument, through
Mhm.
dialogue, discussion, and debate. And we're going to sort of look at some, how that's popularly framed by folks like William Lane Craig and some of his writings, and maybe how Leroy and I might approach that differently from him, but also maybe a little differently from each other, because you and I haven't actually gone through this in detail before of our different approaches. And so we're going to start on doing that maybe this Friday or Saturday. We're going to try to get back to a weekly framework for this if we can, at least through this series. And so we'll see what we can't do for that. So hopefully, folks will tune in. Again, you can find the links to this at our YouTube channel. If you just search on YouTube, More Than Cake, or the blog that I have, morethancake.org. We also work at the Center for Cultural Apologetics, but all the links you can find there at morethancake.org. And we will gladly connect with you, leave comments, all those sort of things, and we'll hopefully talk more. Take care, everyone. God bless. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Fight the power.